This week on the People, Property, Place podcast, we are revisiting the conversation that I had with Nneka Ejindu, formerly of LaSalle Investment Management. Recorded in 2023, this conversation is just as powerful and relevant today as it was back then. So if you are commuting into work on the train or tube, driving to go and see an asset, strap in and listen to this fascinating and wide-ranging conversation that I had with Neca. Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. Today, we're joined by Nneka Ejindu, Senior Asset Manager, most recently employed at LaSalle Investment Management. At LaSalle, Neca was responsible for the proactive asset management and asset transformation of business space, primarily office and industrial assets in London and the southeast of England, as well as driving results across various portfolios that she managed. She is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome her to the podcast today. Neca, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Not at all. Well, I know you've listened to a couple of these podcasts before, and so you know a place I always like to start the conversation is how you got into real estate and why you wanted to get into real estate as well.
Okay, great question. I knew nothing about property whatsoever, and I was actually thinking about this question last night randomly. And I've always had a love of buildings, and what I was thinking about last night was, where did that come from? And I think it came from going to a school that was in a really stunning, beautiful building. It was an old palace. The Duke of Chandos lived there, where my school was, and I was always fascinated by what it looked like, the portions of it and so on, and I'd always looked at buildings. And then when my mum worked in a shopping centre, I was fascinated by the layout and why things looked the way they did. And then when I got to my A-levels and I had maths, chemistry, further maths and geography, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with them. Knowing that I wasn't going to be a scientist, I then started looking into what can I do with maths and geography that is vocational, and stumbled upon surveying. And, no one else in my school whatsoever was even considering it or had thought about it, and no one else in my family even knew what it was. It's not a traditional career for the child of West African parents, that's for sure. But I investigated it and then decided that was what I was going to do, and ended up, applying for Cambridge and Reading, and went to Reading University.
So tell me about yourself at school. Were you, what kind of child were you, and kind of what were your giftings growing up?
I was a relatively academic child, but also really sporty child. I loved sport. I did anything and everything I could do. There was a running joke at my secondary school that I was a one-woman athletics team. So certain Saturdays I would do the 100, the 200, the 400, the relay, the long jump and the high jump, and be knackered when I got back, but so chuffed that I had kind of done all of that. So I love sport. And, I was really into maths. I was a bit geeky, and I used to like writing stories as well, but I kind of fell out of that a little bit. So
it's a very, very competitive, but also, intellectually gifted, and, passion for maths and science. And was that the expectation from a young age from your parents in terms of kind of pursuing more of a, scientific or a different kind of career or route?
Yeah, I think a lot of West African, and I can speak specifically about Nigerian because that's my heritage. I'm from the Igbo tribe. I'm a Nigerian person, or of Nigerian origin. And parents, their currency is their child's intelligence and academia. That's currency more than having financial wealth to some extent. So my mum would brag about every grade we got, when she met her friends. It was about what school you went to, what university you went to. And my mum, single parent, bringing up 4 kids on her own, really kind of pushed all of us to do extracurricular work outside school so that with primary school, all 4 kids either got scholarships or bursaries to private schools. And, you know, I was lucky enough to get into one of the best schools in the country at the time. And that school was very competitive. So I had a competitive nature beforehand, and that drove it. But you kind of realised you understood your order in things. You know, when you're the most intelligent kid in your primary school, it's amazing. You get to a school where everyone's intelligent. You understand more what your particular gifts and strengths are.
So you went to the school and, realised that there are lots of other very gifted children as well.
Yes.
And it was kind of the school, it was that school, was it, that you went to, that private school?
I'll name check the school. It was called North London Collegiate School for Girls, NLCS, and it was a really academic school. I think for at least 20 years, until they moved to the baccalaureate, they were in the top 5, top 1 or 2 of A-level and GCSE results in the country, despite being just a girls' school. They were, really, really pushed you, and everyone in the school was very academic, but you quickly realised where you thought you were great at something. I did maths and further maths, and then you realise that some people just have photographic memories, and they'll be in a lesson for 2 minutes, read the board and know everything that's going on and can regurgitate it back and understand it, and other people approach things in different ways. So it gave you a good understanding of the varieties of people that are out there and the different levels of intelligence. But
and that's where kind of real estate or your kind of beautiful buildings kind of came onto the radar. You mentioned you kind of brought up by a single mother. She didn't have an understanding or an appreciation of real estate. Did you have any friends at school whose parents were in real estate or any contacts?
No, I mean, it was quite funny because I remember when there were careers fairs, we had some amazing people come into our school who were connected to people. We had famous scientists. I remember Jonathan Ross came in at one point. So people were connected to all these people in media or science or politics or law. And I remember connecting my friends with my mum, and they'd go and see my mum in court, prosecuting people as a barrister, but no one had a connection for me in property because no one did that as their main career per se, maybe as an aside, but not as their main career. So I didn't have any of those connections or ins. It was just something I was really curious about, and thought, I know that I'm not going to be the standard sort of Nigerian doctor, lawyer, engineer, dentist or something that, or following my mum's sort of footsteps into law, but it was just something I really wanted to do.
And at that school, were there a lot of other kids of African or West African origin or not?
No. So my school, random fact, my school was a third Jewish, and actually I grew up around an amazing Israeli family to the extent that I spoke Hebrew up until the age of about 12.
Languages as well. Add that into the locker.
I don't speak anymore. I know the alphabet. That's the only thing I remember. My older sister was the first one to go into school. She was the only black person in our entire school at that time. I was the only black girl in my year, and my younger sister, who was 3 years younger than me, was one of 3. So very, very much in the minority, for sure.
And so when you kind of came to kind of leave school, had you done some further research in terms of what a career in real estate would look like? And I know we kind of spoke a little bit off mic in terms of disappointing, maybe the expectation of what you should have gone to do. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you maybe gripped up real estate and kind of thought, actually, that's a career or an area that I want to focus on?
I think what's interesting is because I wanted to do something that was sort of connected to things that I'd learned in geography and to sort of use the analytical side of my brain from maths, I didn't do that much research into the career because I was like, it's going to be interesting, I'll learn something. And as a minimum, my mum was very, very specific and vocal on the fact that I had to do a vocational degree. So you couldn't just do maths or geography or something. She really was very keen on that because that would give you a better path to a career in the future, even if you decided to change your mind at some point. So I thought, I'll learn something. And if I looked at the components of it, it was law, economics, finance. It's like, this is great, I'm going to learn something, I'm going to be interested, I'll learn about building structure. So as a minimum, I'll have learned something and it'll push me in one direction. Maybe I'll want to do something more finance related or otherwise. So I didn't do that much research there. So I was just, apart from into the degrees I was going to do, and I thought I'd kind of wing it from there.
So you applied for Cambridge, you applied for CAS, you applied for quite a few, but you landed at Reading and you did your kind of land management. How was that as an experience?
It was brilliant. I mean, being a sporty kid, the way that the sort of halls of residence were sort of allocated then, the hall I was in was full of lots of sporty people. So I made lots of friends who played sport, whether it be netball, lacrosse, cricket, rugby. And I played lacrosse at school and also at university, and I did athletics at school and at university. So, you know, it was amazing how many sports people as a percentage were in the land management degree. So a good proportion of people that were in my hall were also in my classes. So it was a great sort of intro way to sort of, you know, make a group of friends. So.
Yeah, I think historically universities have got very gifted individuals, certainly from a sporting perspective, and they kind of stick them on the land or the property degree. You know, it's kind of, you can do the property course because you might not be as academically gifted for the other courses that we have. But that's definitely interesting that there's a good range of people. When you qualified, I'm assuming you had a bit more of an understanding of the kind of the real estate space, but it still fascinates me still when I talk to people when they do qualify. There's still so much learning to go through in the different routes. What was your kind of mindset at the time?
I mean, you know, I realised in my first year I was very much sort of focused on just getting cash in. I came from a single parent family with 4 kids, and I was doing work experience with my mum at the Crown Prosecution Service. So I did that for a year and a bit, and then it got to my second year and I thought, you really have to get work experience, and if you have any chance of getting a job, so you need to focus not on the money you're getting but on the experience you're getting to sort of propel your career. So I did work experience at Healy and Baker, at King Sturge, and very, very briefly at Savills, which kind of gave me an indication, well, in some instances an indication of what I wanted to do, in other instances not much, because I won't name the place, but one of our work experience we were given nothing to do, so we were there for 2 weeks reading magazines, which was not particularly useful, but you got to see the hub and bub, and I asked people what they were doing and so on, but I didn't really get stuck in. And that another place, you know, I was working in an investment team, and I got stuck into everything. I was writing their reports, I was going out on inspections with them. I was like, I really enjoyed this. So it gave me a good sense of, you know, let me use that sort of analytical side of my brain, and I'm really going to enjoy this, whichever path I go down.
And so when you qualified, you landed at Pinder, Fry and Benjamin, is that right?
No, when I qualified, I landed at... left
university.
Oh.
So when you left university, that was your first job, was it?
My first job was at Chesterton when I left university, doing the graduate rotation. And amusingly enough, I remember that I really stuck out, for good or for bad. So I would be spoken to on a regular basis by the board because I was the only black graduate, and I found out subsequently that I was the only black qualified surveyor employed by the company globally, which I thought was astounding. I was in a lot of marketing material, I'll put it that way. But it was an interesting experience. I worked in various teams, I met some great people, and it kind of steered me into realising what I liked and didn't, or liked less about.
And that, you did your graduate rotation?
Yeah.
And you got qualified. Which seats did you sit in?
I started in L&T, then I did valuation, office agency in Midtown, and then property asset management when it actually was property and asset management, as opposed to
just property management badged as asset management.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense. And so I'm assuming, and what, for reference for the kind of the listeners, what time or what date was that, or year?
Gosh, that's going to really age me, Matt. Thank you. That was 95.
Okay. And so how long did you stay with Chesterton's for then?
I stayed with them for about just shy of 10 years. I ended up working in the property and asset management team for a client called Botanic, and their name changed to Resolution Asset Management, and then Ignis, and then they were sort of blended into Standard Life and now Aberdeen. And initially when I started, their team was small sort of group of 3 fund managers dealing with sector, and I was working with I think the head of the team, but also the retail fund manager, a chap called Gary Hutchison, who was awesome, a great person to have as your client at the time. And, I learned a lot. He just kind of gave me a lot of scope to come up with ideas to sort of improve value. And, it was a really good learning curve. And also in that team, I had a really, I think, brilliant boss, one of my most positively influential bosses, I would say. His background was sort of army background, and even though he could be a little bit of a gruff person, which everyone assumes you kind of want people to be more friendly or nice to you, but what was more important, and I realised this subsequently, is that they kind of have your back, the whole followership mentality. So he always had my back. He was there to sort of push us, support us, help us grow. Wasn't the most friendly, but I prefer all of those traits rather than someone being really friendly and then not having your back or pushing you or supporting you or helping you sort of grow your career.
Pushing you to unlock and achieve your potential.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're the kind of individual who needed that, craves that,
yes,
and actually responds really well to it.
Yeah, and definitely. And I would say that, having done work experience and investment, I was really keen to do that, having sort of had a investment and finance focus in my degree. And then I didn't have any contacts or connections in investment in any way, shape or form. And, I was told by a number of different people, my business then, other businesses, that I didn't fit because I didn't have any of those contacts. I couldn't bring anything to the table and that it wasn't an option for me. So people weren't offering me opportunities. And, it's one of the things that I kind of think I wouldn't do again. Because I definitely let people's no's know in terms of you can't do this, influence what I did rather than saying, sod this, I'm going to find a way to do it anyway. I didn't want, the real hard uphill battle, like this is way too hard, way harder than it should be and way harder than it is for my peers who've come from Reading, but I will forge my path another way.
So you didn't put up too much of a fight, you just kind of, but you regret that?
I definitely regret that. That's one thing I would, if I was ever giving anyone advice or if I was going back and speaking to myself, I'd say that's one thing I shouldn't have done.
Don't take that no for an answer.
100%.
And actually, follow your gut, double down on it and try and push through, regardless of what you're saying or what someone else is saying to you. And why do you think, other than the obvious of you weren't connected or you didn't have, a parent or what have you, sat at another property fund or a connection, was that really the reason you think at the time? Because you sound incredibly capable across all different areas.
I mean, I can't speak about the whole industry, but there was definitely, I think, from my personal experience, more nepotism then. So if I think of all the people that were senior in the team or all the people that they brought in, they were kids of clients or senior people in the property industry or already connected to another investment agent or an agent or someone that sort of gave them an additional bit of clout. It's, to have an analogy, I was watching, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I was watching some random reality TV, a music show, and they were saying, we're looking for the next big star, but you have to come with your own social media, you're this, that, the other, already done already. And it's kind of that mentality. We want you to bring something already rather than us moulding you. You have to have something so you can hit the ground running. And not having had any connection to the industry, I didn't have any of that.
Yeah, be a known entity and I guess try and be fee earning as quickly as possible, or at least unlock relationships.
Yeah.
So if you had your time again, you kind of tell yourself not to listen to that voice or other people's voices. What did you do, and what did you go on to do after that period? So I realised that agency, even though I really enjoyed aspects of it, wasn't for me. But I did really enjoy it. And then I was working in property asset management and I realised that the asset management and the deal negotiation side of things was what really excited me. I was more interested in the development opportunities and negotiating deals and rent reviews, but kind of coordinating that. So, when I have done sort of careers fairs, and people will say, what's an asset manager? I sort of describe it as a Jacqueline of all trades, because you do a little bit of everything. You do a bit of, agency, planning, development, L&T, rating, property management. There's a
aspect of all of that whole spectrum in your job. And there's someone that went into industry going, all of this is really intriguing, there's all these different areas you can get into, to be in a job that sort of touches on a lot of those areas is actually ultimately a perfect fit for me, I think.
So you took that experience from the advisory side and wanted to apply that on the client side.
Yeah.
Who did you move to, and what was the name of the company that you moved to?
So when I was at Chesterton, my client sort of moved across to Attis Real, as was now BMPPRE, and I was there for a while until the client's team started getting bigger. There was a suggestion that I should go up to Glasgow, and I didn't really want to go up as a single black woman on my own, move to a city that I didn't really know. And maybe, that was a little bit, I didn't challenge myself enough, but I didn't, I was very used to being supported by my family, my friends, and having that sort of network around you, and I wouldn't have had that there. So in the end, I moved to a small property company called Pinderfry & Benjamin, and that sort of gave me my sort of first proper foray into client-side asset management, properly sort of monikered, as opposed to property and asset management.
Advisory.
Yeah, advisory.
Whereas I guess the difference is advising our clients on some initiatives to drive value, and they could take it or leave it. And then the other side of the fence is actually curating and making the decisions and taking the advice, but actually the buck stops with you in terms of what the plan and follow through is going to look like.
Exactly. So I work for a small company, Pinderfry & Benjamin, dealing with new office developments across the country, in partnership with some developers. Some of them were originally housing developers. And it was really interesting because the team, no one else in the team came from a property background, apart from my first boss, who departed relatively soon after I joined. And they didn't really have a healthy respect for people in the property industry, which surprised me, but they were all hedge fund bankers. One of them was an astrophysicist in terms of what he'd studied, and they didn't consider property people to be that bright or intelligent, which kind of came through and was interesting. But ironically enough, was the reason I think the company folded in the end, because there was a underestimation of the people that they were dealing with when they dealt with their JV partnerships and how those agreements were drafted, which meant that when the financial crisis happened, they came a cropper, and I think that again was due to underestimating property people.
So it was a kind of a property company they set up, but the individuals behind it were not property folk.
No.
They were, as you said, bankers or hedge fund people, and I guess financiers or financial engineers trying to engineer a return out of real estate rather than people having a real fundamental understanding of property and the drivers.
Definitely. And I think they were an investment company originally, and they, I think, invested retail, mom and pop, money into things like film projects and other interesting, quirky things, and then forayed from that into real estate, and then brought real estate people in like myself to sort of move that forward.
And you touched on an interesting time, global financial crash, it's very well documented what happened across the industry, and certainly wouldn't have been the only business that had a difficult time. You left and you landed at LaSalle. How did that come around? And having been in the industry for a little period at this stage, did you have mentors? Had you seen more people from kind of African origin come into the industry as well? And how and why did you decide to kind of choose to go to LaSalle?
Okay, quite a few things there. So the choice was initially not a choice in that the company folded because it was the GFC, and we came a cropper when we had assets of identical sizes with our JV partner who was supposed to sell them and we were supposed to lease them, and then GFC happened and that agreement got ripped up and thrown in the bin, and we couldn't compete with them because they had the larger amount of assets per estate. So ultimately it folded, even though we tried for 18 months to try and run up that down escalator and regular meetings with the banks and so on, but that's what happened. And I think I was unemployed for 2 months, but I used my contacts then and some people that I'd worked with previously at Attis and Chesterton as well, just to sort of give me some advice and make some suggestions. And an opportunity came up at LaSalle to work in offices, but ultimately mainly industrial, and it's an opportunity I took to then sort of go from a small propco to a proper institution.
Yeah, I guess it must be a big change and a mindset shift, going from a smaller business to a big fund management shop.
Hugely, going from working with for a company for 3 years, where it started off with 7 people, ended up with about 20, to then being on a floor of 50 to 60 odd people and another floor of more people. It was definitely a mindset shift for sure. So understanding how things work, politics, how business is structured, what you need to do to move your career forward, all of that kind of stuff was a real steep learning curve for sure.
Did you, just one of my other questions was, did you have any sort of mentors at this time advising you on which route to take?
No, I didn't actually. I didn't, because I moved through from property and asset management, as it were, to a small propco, and didn't sort of create any relationships there where anyone was mentoring me. And I didn't really know many people in this space to sort of guide me or direct me. So I kind of forged my own path, and that's something which if I was giving someone advice, would say, find a mentor or sponsor as early as possible in your career, because they can definitely help you avoid pitfalls or, give you tips in terms of easier ways to go about things or open doors for you. And I didn't have that, or didn't really appreciate the weight and the benefit of that in order for me to seek it out.
At this time, and I'm really keen to kind of dive into the LaSalle experience as well, were there more people from African origin entering the industry, or was kind of property, was there a diversity push across the board? Was it spoken about, or was it still, did you kind of still feel isolated in a kind of a nepotistic, pale male stale environment?
I noticed a shift in that there were definitely more women and more people of colour, but not necessarily black people. There were definitely more Asian people in my business, but I think I was the only person of colour for a while in my team until we merged with another business. And I didn't see many other black professionals. I saw other black people in the business, whether they be administration staff or otherwise, but not a black qualified surveyor. So people in the industry generally, yes, but not surveyors. Until I think I went to my first event. It might have been the first IAS conference, and I sort of found myself in a little huddle with about 4 or 5 people. There was a couple of agents and then a couple of occupiers of sort of Asian and black origin, and we were all kind of in this little huddle, about 5 or 6 of us, going, for 400 people here and there's this few of us in the room. So it's something you kind of note, and it kind of gives you a camaraderie, because you kind of note that you stand out for good and or for bad in a room.
You landed at LaSalle. Talk to me about your experience. You're obviously an asset manager. You clearly kind of found your sweet spot in terms of your career. What do you enjoy doing, like the variety of it? You said you started off on offices. Can you just give me a bit of an overview of that time, and then maybe that transition to business space, which is obviously a term that is kind of hasn't been used for a few years, I guess because of the different niches within real estate, but also kind of more recently you've been focusing on the industrial and logistics space. But yeah, just initially, can you just talk to me about what that early piece looked like?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined the business, because I'd come in from a job for the past 3 years that had been very much office focused, I understood that I was going to have more of an office leaning. And then when I saw my portfolio, it was 50% industrial. And I was like, what is this? Because my first job for the first few years of my career was all retail focused. So I went from retail to offices, and then a sector that I knew very little about or understood very little about. And what I found really exciting or interesting was it was really considered a poor relation, shall we say, to retail and, central London offices and so on. And I remember at the beginning having an insane amount of availability on assets, having a crazy level of tenant turnover. and just having a really low rental base, even in Greater London. But sort of knowing that there was scope to improve that. And then watching the evolution of the industrial market and being part of that and seeing my assets where I pushed and doubled rents over a period of time, and where, from a scarcity point of view, people were calling you up on a regular basis to get on your estate, let alone you having 50% of your estate, with availability. So that was really awesome to be part of that and to watch it from being, the poor relation, the poor cousin, to being someone that was on the same level almost as the other sectors.
Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much.
Someone listening to this who might not be in property or is early on in their career in property and kind of working out kind of different career moves to make, can you just talk a little bit about how LaSalle as a business, as an institution, is set up, and the different funds and the different roles that you had or responsibilities?
Okay.
Because there's quite a lot of jargon, from open-ended funds to closed-ended funds to every group.
Different institutions are set up differently. So some people are set up on a fund-by-fund basis. Other people are set up on a sector basis, and that actually may be the nature of their fund, being 100% sector focused. And I understand that when I joined the business, it had recently shifted from being you're in a fund team and you work across whatever sectors there are within that fund team, to being a sector and sort of geographical focused, with the aim of us being more specialised and knowing our markets even better, which, people say it swings and roundabouts, which is better. But I think that kind of really worked for our business, because I really got to know my patch, I got to know my agents, I got to understand what was happening in those markets, and even in the bits that you didn't know, you could kind of extrapolate better, or you knew someone that you could ask. So it was a really good way to sort of understand the sector or the sectors I was dealing with, office and industrial, and to understand those markets. And our business was mainly at the time pension fund business. So there was something quite gratifying about knowing that every bit of performance you got was going into, a coal miner's pension. I found that really gratifying. For some people, it may not make a difference. For me, it's like I can see there's a real purpose to it. And the funds were closed-ended.
Which meant what?
It meant that the fund had a definitive end date, and obviously there are less issues of inflows and outflows when people require redemptions and pulling money in and out of those funds if it's open-ended.
I guess so. You can execute your business plan. You kind of know what the plan is going to be, and you need to kind of liability match the pension fund or the pensioners. Pensions, right? Yeah, the requirements.
When more cash was needed, that disposal needed to happen, and you would look across your portfolio and work out, which were the lesser performing, or which ones you wanted to keep, or which ones you were focused on getting higher income from. It was a really sort of interesting and informative and sort of eye-opening experience for me, when I hadn't had any dealings with that whatsoever beforehand. So
you touched on the fact you had some retail experience, then it moved into offices, and then industrial and logistics, and you've kind of seen the transformation of that. Did you always want to go down the industrial and logistics route, or did you kind of just fall upon it and across it, and that kind of just workload just increased as the market picked up?
I definitely fell into it, because, if at that time when I was joining the business, if you asked anyone which were the exciting and sexy, for want of a word, sectors, industrial isn't the one that would have come up or would have been mentioned by anyone. You wanted to be in investment, irrespective of sector, but you wanted to be in retail, and you wanted to be in office, and then industrial was kind of the like I said earlier, the poor relation. So I fell into it in that the the team that was hiring at the time was business-based focused, and albeit I did have a proportion of my assets were offices, a good majority of them were industrial. So for me, it was, like I said, something really new, learning the types of occupiers that would be in that space, and sort of understanding those micro locations and the micro market. So yeah, it was a real learning curve.
Talk to me about your kind of progression. How did your role change as your tenure with the business increased as well?
So I think, you start off with a number of assets and you're focused on, I think, the basics. You're focused on the rent collection, you're focused on what your property managers are doing, you're focused on your estate's diaries, your rent reviews and your lease expiries. And that is the sort of foundation, the basic foundation of asset management. And then it's when you can extrapolate that into something more interesting. So looking at sort of asset reallocation, perhaps in terms of changing from one sector to another, looking at planning regularisation so that you can improve the rents in your assets, looking at improving your tenant mix or changing your tenant mix to move things around, looking at redeveloping your assets. So all of those things come into play more when you have the basics and the foundations sort of in your back pocket, as it were. But also, I guess that depends on your background. So people that come into asset management come from various different places. People come from valuation, they come from agency, they come from property management, and they all approach it slightly differently.
Did you have any responsibility for team or man management? Did that kind of factor into your role as well?
An element of it, in that even though we all had our own patches and our teams were relatively small, you had a massive external team that you were coordinating. So, if you have, at one point, I think I had the largest number of tenants, in our team. So you're coordinating all of these planners, developers, your JV partners, your lawyers, your property managers, your rating surveyors, and making sure that all of them are working towards the same goal, which is improving or maximising value on that asset.
Outside of your day job, I know you sit on lots of panels, you drive lots of initiatives, things from skills workshop, 10,000 black interns, you kind of led in the curation with Inter-University, as well as the DE&I operating committee. Can you just talk to me a little bit about your interest and some of these things that you've kind of been a part of and have driven?
Okay. So DEI is something I'm passionate about, and I guess every moment of every day is a DEI moment for me in terms of how people meet or interact with me. So that's something I'm sort of aware of on a daily basis. And I think as I saw businesses starting to actually set up diversity boards or diversity task force, and seeing that initially a lot of them were purely gender focused, and I was like, well, what about all of the other areas of diversity? So that kind of really spurred me to question, why are we just focusing on gender? What are we doing in terms of the other areas of ethnicity or race or sexuality or neurodiversity or disability? What are we doing in all of those areas? And that kind of sort of pushed me to sit on, or asked to sit on, a working group that's underneath the board at our business to try and deal with or to tackle other areas, to see how our business was approaching those other areas. And it also brought, into my spill, brought my attention to what our sort of sister business, JLL, was doing. And obviously being significantly larger than we are, they had more scale and ability to have groups in all these different areas. So their gender balance group, their Race for Change group as well. So I joined the Race for Change group. I became, an affiliate committee member because I was in a different business, but sister business. And being one of the most senior people of colour that had anything to do with that, I was able to sort of help all of the people in that business, help them alongside, I think at a certain point, their head of diversity, equity and inclusion, drive that committee forward and help support all of the people that were actually the main co-chairs of that committee.
What year would you say that people started waking up and taking this seriously?
I would say when it came to gender, I remember 2016, 2017, it's starting to become more of a thing. And then I think 2018 or 2019 or so was when more things started happening from my perspective with, let's say, race or ethnicity-led working groups in those areas of diversity. And things, again, took a little bit more of an uptick post-2020 and the whole George Floyd situation, which really had a huge impact, and maybe not in a way that people can fully understand or comprehend, on every person of colour, particularly if they're living in a country that is they're a minority. It really was like a shock to the system, because it made you kind of think, that could happen to anyone at any point in time. So, yeah, it definitely had a big impact on me and changed the way that I wanted to have impact on our industry. It made me kind of focus, thinking I need to do as much as I possibly can to shift the perspective of our industry, to change the pipeline, to put myself out there, even when I'm uncomfortable putting myself out there sometimes, so that people have someone they can speak to and ask about it. And, suffice to say, I then joined the Industrial Agents Society Women Industrial Property Committee and have helped them organise 3 conferences. The last one was last week and it was brilliant. A big congratulations to all my fellow committee members for helping organise that. And then also, working on Black History Month events for my company and also with JLL, working with charities. So I wanted to focusing on pipeline. I came into contact with a charity called Into University, put my business, LaSalle, in contact with them, and then we worked with them on business and focus days and on their internship program, which is a program called Bright City, Big Future, and brought in some interns, and these are kids from a more disadvantaged background, and helping them get a perspective or understanding of all the opportunities that are out there for them. And recently I've worked with them and brought them into connection with the IAS, who have now brought them in as a charity partner for the next year, which is amazing. And then more recently, I'm sitting on the Association of Real Estate Funds RFDI task force. So yeah, I wanted to do things. I wanted to leave this industry all my time when I finished working and feel that I've had a real impact to change things, and so that nobody has the experiences, plural, that I had when I was sort of beginning in the industry.
Amazing. Outside of the obvious, who's been driving this? Is it investors? Is it companies? Is it kind of employees? Is it leaving it in a better state for the pipeline and the kind of the good of our industry and people coming through? Who's been fundamentally behind this?
I think that's a really good question, Matt. I think it's driven by 2 small sections of our industry. It's driven by the young people coming in who want to see change and want a business that is making change, and it's driven by board level. So people at board level, in the main, understand the benefits of diversity of thought and diversity of perspective throughout their business. So they are helping and sponsoring, and in some instances mentoring and working alongside these working groups to try and push this agenda forward. But they are, between them, most probably 20% of any business or the industry, and it's the other 80% that the young people have to work their way through, and that the board members have to persuade to want to make change or be impactful in that change, or to even care about that change. And that's the difficult bit, and the term I coined was the frozen middle. And ultimately, I was so keen for people to care, because I understand empathy makes a big difference in how people deal with things and how they react to things. But at the end of the day, I'm more concerned now, maybe that was a bit naive before, more concerned now that people want to make change even if they see that it's financially beneficial to them. So I'm more concerned they want to start making their change rather than their reasons behind the change, because I really am keen to see change happen or continue to happen.
So you're sceptical of the reason why they want to change? Is that what
Yeah, I kind of skipped it, because I can't expect everyone to care about the subject as much as I do. And that was a lesson that I learned, that not everyone can be passionate about something that doesn't affect everyone. You know, I can't expect someone who grew up and doesn't have any friends of colour, doesn't socialise with them, doesn't understand or doesn't have a disabled person in their family or someone that's neurodiverse or have any friends that like to understand that or to care about it. People generally care more about gender topics because everyone has a mother, a sister, a daughter, you know, a niece or a cousin or something. But that isn't the case when it comes to all these other areas of diversity. So getting people to care can potentially be a bit of an uphill battle, but making them understand why it's important is different from the sort of empathy and the caring side of things. So I want both, but I'll happily accept one.
So that frozen middle that you kind of talk about, that 80%, someone listening to it, who does care and does want to see change and want to be part of it, like what can that frozen middle do, or what steps can they practically take to help?
I think one of the things that people that come into our industry from different backgrounds need, and a lot of them, like I said, don't have any connections. They stumble upon it or someone recommends it to them, is to open up doorways for them, to offer them your time from a mentorship point of view, or more importantly, sponsorship. Because mentorship's great. Mentorship's having someone that can, you know, give you advice, this, that, the other, but a sponsor is someone that, you know, puts his neck on the line and puts you forward for opportunities. And I think that is equally as important as mentorship. So having someone open those doors for you, someone that gives you those connections and helps you network when you don't necessarily have those opportunities easily in front of you. So you at least puts you on a equitable par with your peers, basically, and then staying with those people and, you know, making sure that if there's a member of your team that you don't understand, go out of your way to try and understand them, because maybe if you did, then you would put opportunities in front of them like you do the people that you feel more comfortable with. And a lot of that happens is not overt and it's not conscious, it's subconscious.
What does success look like within this space? Because it's a sensitive topic. It's one that people have challenges bringing up, partly because they don't know how to bring it up. There's a desire to bring it up, and they want to kind of combat it. But what does success look like, and what would you like to see?
I think the first step and a big hurdle is everyone just getting comfortable with discussing the topic, asking awkward questions, and there being forums for them to do so, and people being less sensitive about being asked those questions. I think one of the difficulties is that when we're talking about any area of diversity, the people at a sort of junior level that are pushing it forward are all those people in those areas of diversity that are sort of trying to overcome those hurdles themselves and also trying to do their job. So they're basically doing two jobs at the same time. So making sure those people are supported is a really big thing, and not all businesses do. They see that, they don't understand at that time it's actually beneficial to their business, and making their business more diverse will end up making their business more profitable, but they don't give those people the time to spend on those things and realise that actually it enhances their business and should be allocated as such if they're being appraised or dealt with or otherwise. So I'd say that that's a really big first step, is that element of giving people time, not just your own personal time, but their time to actually help move that agenda forward for all of those businesses in our industry. And when I was talking about forums, you can't move something forward if you're not able to talk about it and you don't have goals. So, you know, I'm not one that is necessarily comfortable with quotas, but you need to have a target. There is no business that has grown that hasn't set themselves financial targets for doing so. So if they want to improve any other areas, why they wouldn't set targets doesn't sort of make sense to me. And then forums, creating forums where people feel comfortable talking about uncomfortable things. And JLL did a great thing. They had a quarterly event called Let's Talk About Race, where one or two people would talk about a specific subject matter. They'd talk about what happened with Black Lives Matter in Bristol. A guy from Bristol chatted about that. What happened, your experiences as someone who's mixed race. So all these different topics were sort of brought up. And in it, everyone that comes, it's not videoed, it's not recorded, and that people are encouraged to ask any question, no matter how awkward or how silly the question, something that you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable walking up to your colleague who sits next to you and saying, I was reading this thing in the news and I just wondered what your perspective is on it because I thought this. And that can kind of change the way someone thinks about it, but they are so uncomfortable in even broaching it just in case they offend someone. So having
they get
more
terminology wrong.
Exactly.
Which,
or say the
cripples
wrong
people
thing.
in terms of saying it because of the fear of the repercussion of how it could be perceived.
Or hugely. So, for example, how you describe somebody. I would prefer to be described as a British African than someone black because my skin colour is brown. I'm not actually black, but that's my personal preference. But the person next door to me with the same skin colour may have a completely different preference. So how does somebody know when they're approaching me and then they go, oh, let me chat to the other person? The person is completely offended. So I think it's just trying to understand that whilst there are sensitivities, as someone of colour, you have to be more open to trying to provide explanations and direct people to resources and things where they can find out more, but also be open, once people have read those resources, to them coming back and asking you questions. And then also people being open to asking those questions and then adapting themselves following those questions being asked. And a really useful conduit for that has been reverse mentoring. And that's one of the things that I kind of helped set up and worked on with the JLL Race for Change network. Was a reverse mentoring program, and they did it internally but also externally. And I was lucky enough to work with Bill Hughes Elgin, and we had some amazing conversations. And he very kindly said the other day that it was he found having that or hearing my different perspective really beneficial on topics, and we would literally talk about anything and everything to see where our different perspectives came from after sort of having gotten to understand where we both came from. So I think that's really useful because then you also create empathy. Somebody then knows and cares about someone, and then whenever something comes up, you contextualise it with the person or the thing that you know, and it means more to you that way.
I had Chloe Prince on the podcast quite a few months ago because I think she was involved with the reverse mentorship in setting that up. But for someone who doesn't know what reverse mentorship is or is hearing it for the first time, can you just expand on that further in simplistic terms?
Yes. So I think simplistically, mentorship is when someone more junior in a business works alongside or has meetings with someone more senior in the business, and you get to talk about your career experiences and ask for advice and tips on how to move things forward. Reverse mentorship is kind of opposite from that, where someone more senior is the mentee and the more junior person is the mentor, and that person normally comes from a diverse area, so whether it be race or LGBTQ or neurodiversity or from a gender perspective. And then that relationship, that same relationship, that friendly relationship is formed, but you're talking about a lot of subject matter that pertains to that particular area of diversity and talking about issues and ways to move things forward and your backgrounds and so on. So it gives someone context. And I think context and perspective is always great. The more you have, the better.
You spoke earlier about quotas and financial quotas, but also quotas in terms of representation. What does success look like within that quota space? Because it's quite easy just to look at it from a mathematical perspective. And what are you benchmarking it against? Is it UK populace in terms of the Office of National Statistics and how that's broken down into different groups? Is that the benchmark and what success looks like?
I think what I'd say was I don't necessarily believe in quotas, but I believe in targets. Like, there is nothing that a business, professional or successful business would do that doesn't involve them setting a financial or a target for them to achieve or aspire to. So for me, what that would look like in a business, and I think a lot of people use this definition, is looking like your clients, looking like the population looking like your customers. Your pensioners are from, if you, whatever the business is, your pensioners will be from everywhere, every walk of life. So why shouldn't the people in your business have some mimicking of that similar spread of diversity, whether it be age or gender or race or sexuality or neurodiversity or disability?
We can cover so much ground within this particular topic, and I know the people listening here will be listening to this and go, certainly inspired by what you've done, but also want to take positive action to help, whether that is in the form of allyship or what have you. Where would you point people if they're listening to this and they want to be proactive or intentional about an area of diversity or of the market? Where would you point them, and what advice would you give them to follow or lead in this particular area?
I would say if you're senior in a business or in middle management, I would intentionally seek out rather than wait to be approached by younger, more junior people in your business that come from more diverse backgrounds and offer to mentor or sponsor them. If your business isn't of the size where you can do that, then there are quite a few charities that offer those conduits. I'll mention Into University again, they're one that does that, and there are other charities that do similar things, and find people that you can mentor and perhaps give them a perspective of the property industry so they'll want to come into the property industry. I would also say, if you're in senior leadership, then definitely be setting targets for, as a minimum, matching the population of where your business is located. And then it's not just about getting people into your business, it's about retaining people whilst they're in your business. So once you get people in, making sure that there are equitable opportunities that are given to them to grow, to flourish, to network, to meet people, to have exposure to the right people as well alongside their peers, so that they retain or they are retained in that business, and then you have this pool to then have a more diverse leadership as well.
Which has got loads of net benefits across the board. You left LaSalle last year.
Yes.
Your role and your impact covers so many different areas. It's like having 2 or 3 jobs. As you kind of look across the marketplace, who are you in awe of, and who's doing a really good job within this space? And what are you most excited about in terms of the property industry moving forward?
I am really excited about innovation, and particularly in areas of sustainability, and also what people are doing when it comes to diversity and sort of changing that agenda. So from a sort of innovation and climate change point of view, the businesses that are involved in, for example, the black and white building, using CLT as a way to, reduce embodied carbon and reduce the need for carbon offsets really is exciting to me. And, one of the things I've spent some time doing is, listening to various conferences and CPD on CLT and moving that agenda forward, and why we're so nervous about it. As well as the black and white building, the Roots in the Sky project by Fabrics is also something that I find really exciting. Shifting that mindset from what actually a green roof is to actually an urban garden on the roof as opposed to just a green roof. And then from a diversity perspective, you mentioned some of these entities earlier, but 10,000 black interns, the Diversity Project and the Skills Workshop, the founders of those entities I find really inspirational, because not only have they had a real impact on our industry and a number of other industries in bringing more exposure of diverse candidates to those industries and helping their pipeline, but it's also starting to change the way people in our industry think about finding more diverse candidates and transferable skills, bearing in mind it isn't a standard career path for a person of colour, from my understanding and from the numbers that we're seeing coming into the industry and taking degrees. So those are the people that I am inspired by for sure.
As we draw this kind of conversation to a close, the question I ask everyone on the podcast is, if you had £500 million of equity, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
Being able to pick a particular person or a number of people is really difficult, because I have had the pleasure of either working alongside, working with, or even watching from afar some amazingly intelligent and talented people in our industry. So I'd really struggle to name names. The sector would be industrial, because it's something like like I said, it's the poor relation, and it's one where you really get to prove people wrong, which is actually quite exciting.
And which particular part of the industrial sector?
Well, I think at the moment people are doing things that are slightly more innovative. So if you look at sort of ultra urban industrial, for example, going back to what was 1920 stop, but modernising it. So people think of it as something new. It's not something new. It's been around for over 100 years. It's just someone, evolving that and doing that now on sort of slightly more quirky industrial sites. So that kind of thing, but also being more sustainable in design, and more sustainable and social impact features in the industrial as well, sort of mimicking other sectors. And in terms of location or places, London's where I grew up. It's where I've seen the most performance in my assets over the past decade. So I think that's somewhere I'd stick to, albeit it would be quite exciting, bearing in mind, the post-pandemic sort of nearshoring trend, to sort of look at sort of industrial property in North Africa. So that could be really exciting.
Well, you've got £500 million to play with. You'll have quite a bit of equity to deploy in different areas. So rather than pinning you on the spot, some further kind of strategy and thinking, I'm sure you could draw something up quite interesting. Well, look, yeah, I've been fascinated by this story and your conversation, and really humbled to hear about your experiences, but really pleased to hear about the positive change that's happening across the industry. I am absolutely sure, because I think we said it off mic, that you're like, oh, my mother's really disappointed with the career that I decided to take. Yes. I bet she'd be more than thrilled with the impact you're having and what you've gone on to achieve. And I've learned an awful lot, and I know that the people listening to this will be. And I think one of the takeaways or the learnings for me is being comfortable asking uncomfortable questions, and kind of going into that with an open mind, and doing it in kind of an open way, to try and kind of build that understanding, that relationship. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your experience. And you can find Nneka on LinkedIn.
Yes.
If you want to reach out to her, I think she'd be more than delighted to help. And well, look, thanks so much for coming in, joining us in the podcast studio and sharing a little bit more about your background.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed every moment about this, even though I was very nervous coming to it. It's been really fun. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for getting in the podcast seat and putting yourself out there to share a little bit more and break down some barriers. So thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show, or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information. Or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you